At my granddaughter's wedding, my name tag didn't say grandmother of the bride. It said the absent old lady. I stood in the lobby of the Grand Lenox Hotel in downtown Boston with that piece of cardstock trembling slightly between my fingers while guests in black tuxedos and silk gowns drifted past me beneath crystal chandeliers worth more than my first house. For a moment, I honestly thought it had to be a mistake. Some cruel printing error from an overworked wedding planner. But then I noticed the tiny gold border around the card, perfectly matching the wedding's ivory and gold theme, and I realized someone had ordered this intentionally. Someone had approved it. "Is something wrong, ma'am?" the young woman at the registration table asked softly. She couldn't have been older than 22, her dark hair pinned into a polished bun, her smile trained and careful. I forced myself to smile back. "No," I said quietly. "I suppose not. I pinned the name tag onto my navy blue dress anyway. My late husband Walter used to say dignity mattered most when people tried to take it from you." So I lifted my shoulders, adjusted my pearl necklace, and walked into the ballroom as though my heart hadn't just cracked open in the middle of a five-star hotel. The reception hall looked like something from a bridal magazine. White roses climbed the marble columns. Candlelight flickered across gold-rimmed champagne glasses. A string quartet played softly near the dance floor, while waiters carried silver trays filled with crab cakes and tiny filet mignon sliders. I paid for every bit of it. The flowers, the orchestra, the imported champagne Sabrina insisted had to come from France because California wine looked cheap. Even the ice sculpture shaped like intertwined swans had been charged to my account 3 weeks earlier. Nearly $90,000 for a wedding designed to erase me from it. My granddaughter Sabrina stood near the sweetheart table laughing beside her new husband Daniel, while photographers circled them like satellites around the sun. She looked beautiful in her custom lace gown, the one I'd quietly paid an extra $4,000 to alter after she changed her mind twice. When she finally noticed me standing near the entrance, her smile faltered for less than a second before returning brighter than before. "Polished, practiced, empty. Grandma," she called loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "You made it." As if there had ever been a chance I wouldn't. As if I hadn't spent the last 11 months financing her dream wedding while she ignored half my phone calls. She kissed my cheek lightly without smudging her lipstick. Her perfume smelled expensive and cold. "Do you like the ballroom?" she asked. I glanced around slowly. "It's beautiful," I answered. "I'm glad." But what I really wanted to ask was why my seat wasn't beside the family table. Why my name wasn't listed anywhere in the wedding program. Why the slideshow looping across giant projection screens showed childhood photos of Sabrina with everyone except me. No pictures from the summers she spent at my lake house. No Christmas mornings in my living room. No image of the woman who raised her half the time while her mother chased luxury and status from one marriage to another. I stood quietly near the edge of the ballroom while guests laughed beneath golden lights. And for the first time in 71 years, I understood what it felt like to be carefully erased while still standing in the room. Then, just as the quartet shifted into another song, I heard a little girl whisper loudly to her mother nearby, "If she's the absent old lady, why is she even here?" I spent almost a year helping Sabrina build that wedding one expensive decision at a time. The ballroom alone had cost more than Walter and I paid for our first home back in 1978. But every time I hesitated over another invoice, Sabrina would wrap her arms around me and say, "Grandma, this is the most important day of my life." I wanted to believe that meant something. I wanted to believe I still meant something. A waiter passed by carrying crystal champagne flutes, and I reached for one mostly to keep my hands occupied. Across the ballroom, Sabrina's mother Patricia stood near the floral arch greeting guests as though she were royalty welcoming people into a palace she had built herself. Patricia wore emerald silk and diamonds that looked suspiciously familiar. Walter had bought me a pair exactly like them for our 40th anniversary. I had not seen them in over a year. "Evelyn." Patricia's voice floated toward me before she did. She kissed the air beside my cheek without touching me. "You look lovely tonight." "Thank you," I replied. Everything turned out beautifully. She smiled proudly, but not warmly. "We worked so hard on this wedding." I almost laughed at that. Patricia had contributed opinions. I had contributed checks. There was a difference. Behind her, a giant welcome sign stood beside the dance floor written in elegant gold script. "The Collins Wedding." Beneath it, smaller lettering read, a celebration made possible by the love and generosity of Patricia Harper. I stared at those words for several seconds. My chest tightened slowly, like someone pulling silk ribbon around my ribs. Not my name. Not even Walter's family name. Patricia noticed my expression and tilted her head slightly. "Oh, Sabrina thought it sounded cleaner this way," she said casually. "You know how modern weddings are." Modern. Such a convenient word for selfishness. I took a slow sip of champagne and nodded once. Of course. Nearby, guests admired the dessert table covered in gold-trimmed pastries flown in from New York that morning. I paid $600 just to have the macarons delivered before noon. The wedding planner had called me 3 separate times, panicking over the transportation delay, while Patricia ignored every call. Yet now she stood in the center of the room, accepting compliments like an actress during opening night applause. Daniel approached then, looking uncomfortable inside his tailored tuxedo. He had always seemed polite to me. Nervous, maybe. Too eager to please Sabrina. "Mrs. Harper," he said softly. "Thank you again for everything. Seriously, none of this would exist without you." Before I could answer, Sabrina appeared beside him instantly, her smile tightening at the corners. "Daniel, sweetheart, the photographer needs us near the staircase." Her hand closed around his wrist almost possessively. Then she turned toward me again with that bright, social smile she used whenever other people were watching. "Grandma, did you see the memory slideshow yet? Everyone loves it." I glanced toward the enormous projection screens lining the ballroom walls. Childhood photos faded slowly one into another while guests pointed and laughed fondly. Sabrina at Disney World. Sabrina at private school graduation. Sabrina skiing in Aspen with Patricia. Sabrina opening her first car keys beside a red Mercedes I had quietly paid the down payment for. Not one photograph included me. Not one. It was like watching someone carefully edit an entire person out of existence. I stood there for nearly 10 minutes waiting for even a single image to appear from all the years she spent in my home after Patricia's second divorce. Christmas mornings in my kitchen. Summers at the lake house. Baking peach cobbler together every 4th of July. Nothing came. The screen shifted to another glamorous engagement photo instead. Beside me, 2 women in designer gowns admired the slideshow while balancing tiny dessert plates in manicured hands. "Patricia really devoted herself to this wedding," one of them said. "You can tell Sabrina gets her elegance from her mother." The other woman nodded. "Absolutely. Families like theirs always make everything look effortless." I lowered my champagne glass carefully before my hand started shaking enough for someone to notice. I spent most of the evening drifting quietly from one corner of the ballroom to another like a guest who had wandered into the wrong wedding by accident. Nobody openly insulted me. That was the remarkable part. Everything was polished, elegant, careful. The cruelty lived inside the details. My assigned seat was not at the family table near the dance floor. It was beside the service hallway near the swinging kitchen doors where waiters disappeared carrying empty trays and dirty dishes. Every few minutes, bursts of laughter floated from the main tables, while silverware clattered behind me from the catering station. I stared at the seating card again, just to make sure I had not misunderstood. Evelyn Harper. Table 14. I looked toward Sabrina's table, where Patricia sat laughing beside. Wealthy friends from her country club, while Daniel's parents occupied seats directly beside the bride and groom. Even Daniel's second cousin from Arizona had a closer seat than I did. I sat down slowly and folded my hands in my lap. Walter used to tell me that humiliation rarely arrives loudly. Real humiliation arrives politely. A waiter filled my water glass before hurrying away again. Around me sat people I did not know. One older couple from Connecticut, a dental surgeon and his wife. A woman wearing enough diamonds to blind half the room beneath the chandeliers. Nobody recognized me. "How do you know the bride?" the woman beside me asked kindly while unfolding her napkin. I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could speak, the dental surgeon smiled casually. "She must be from the groom's side." I do not know why that hurt as much as it did. Perhaps because I suddenly realized my own family had succeeded in making me invisible even while I sat inside the room they built with my money. Dinner arrived in perfect courses. Lobster ravioli, filet mignon with truffle mashed potatoes, chocolate souffle topped with edible gold flakes. Every plate looked like artwork. Sabrina moved gracefully from table to table accepting compliments while photographers followed her every movement. When she reached table 14, Her smile softened slightly for the cameras. "Everyone," she announced brightly, "this is my grandmother, Evelyn." For one brief second, relief loosened something inside my chest. Then she laughed lightly and added, "She is never around much, but she surprised us by coming tonight." The table laughed politely. I smiled because there was nothing else to do. Never around. I spent 10 years raising her 3 afternoons a week while Patricia chased investment bankers through Manhattan and reinvented herself after every divorce. I taught Sabrina how to drive. I paid for orthodontics when Patricia claimed money was tight despite arriving in a new Mercedes the following month. I sat beside Sabrina in emergency rooms after childhood asthma attacks while Patricia posted beach photos from St. Bart's. But now the story had changed. Families rewrite history all the time when gratitude becomes inconvenient. After dinner, guests gathered near the dance floor for speeches. The ballroom lights dimmed softly until the entire room glowed gold beneath hundreds of hanging candles. Sabrina stood at the microphone holding Daniel's hand, while tears shimmered perfectly in her eyes. "This wedding would never have happened without my amazing mother," she said emotionally. Applause filled the ballroom immediately. Patricia pressed manicured fingers against her chest like a gracious queen accepting praise from loyal subjects. "Mom," Sabrina continued, her voice trembling carefully, "you taught me elegance, strength, and how to create beauty in life." More applause. Louder this time. I sat perfectly still while the guests around me smiled admiringly toward Patricia. Not once did Sabrina glance in my direction. Not once. Then the projector screens behind her shifted unexpectedly to a black and white childhood photograph. Sabrina, at 6 years old, standing beside Patricia in matching white dresses. The audience sighed affectionately. But I remembered taking that photograph myself at the lake house on Cape Cod, while Patricia was 3 states away with a man whose name I never bothered learning. Even the memories had been reassigned now. Even the truth belonged to someone else. The first time Patricia left Sabrina with me overnight, the child was 7 years old and terrified of thunderstorms. I still remember her small pink suitcase sitting beside my front door while rain hammered against the windows of my lake house in Cape Cod. Patricia had called barely 20 minutes before dropping her off. "I have an emergency business trip," she said impatiently. Although later I discovered the emergency involved a 3-day weekend in Miami with a man she eventually married for less than a year. Sabrina arrived wearing damp sneakers and clutching a stuffed rabbit, missing one button eye. That night she crawled into bed beside me after midnight when thunder rattled the roof. "Grandma," she whispered shakily, "will you stay awake until the storm stops?" I stayed awake the entire night listening to rain while her tiny hand held onto mine beneath the blankets. Funny how memory works. Some people remember sacrifices as love. Others remember them as obligations they no longer wish to acknowledge. Across the ballroom, Sabrina swayed slowly with Daniel during their first dance, while guests lifted phones to record every polished second of it. The live band played softly beneath glowing chandeliers, while waiters refreshed champagne glasses around the room. Everything looked perfect from a distance. That was the dangerous thing about beautiful families. Most strangers never notice the fractures hidden beneath the photographs. I watched Patricia approach another table of guests, laughing loudly while accepting compliments about the wedding decorations. Every few minutes, she glanced towards Sabrina with theatrical pride, as though she alone had built this entire life from scratch. But I remembered the overdue tuition notices from Sabrina's private high school. I remembered the orthodontist bills Patricia cried about over lunch before casually mentioning a ski trip to Aspen the following week. I remembered wiring $15,000 to cover Sabrina's freshman housing deposit at Columbia because Patricia claimed her investment account had temporarily lost liquidity. Wealthy people always invent elegant language for irresponsibility. When Walter was alive, he used to warn me gently about Patricia. "She treats gratitude like a short-term loan," he told me once while we sat on the lake house porch watching Sabrina roast marshmallows near the water. "One day she will convince that girl to do the same thing." I defended Patricia back then because I wanted peace inside the family. I told myself divorce changed people. Financial pressure changed people. Loneliness changed people. But standing inside that ballroom, watching my own granddaughter erase me from her life, one carefully edited detail at a time, I finally understood something painful. Character does not suddenly appear during hard times. It simply becomes visible. A burst of laughter near the bar pulled me back to the present. Sabrina stood with several bridesmaids holding a crystal champagne coupe, while photographers snapped candid pictures. "Do not forget to tag me in the good ones," she joked. "Especially the family shots. We need at least one photo where everybody actually looks expensive tonight." The women around her laughed immediately. One bridesmaid glanced toward me briefly before lowering her voice. "What about your grandmother?" she asked carefully. Sabrina barely hesitated. "Oh, she does not really like photos anymore," she replied smoothly. "She prefers staying in the background." Staying in the background. I stared down at my folded napkin while something cold settled quietly inside my chest. That was how they justified it to themselves. Not cruelty, not exclusion, preference. They had rewritten me into someone small enough to ignore comfortably. Daniel looked uncomfortable again. I noticed it this time in the way he shifted beside Sabrina without speaking. His smile faded slightly around the edges while the bridesmaids continued laughing about social media captions and honeymoon selfies. Then Sabrina leaned closer to one of them and said softly, "Honestly, once all the trust paperwork clears, things will finally feel simpler around here." She spoke casually, carelessly, like someone discussing weather instead of a human being. And for the first time all evening, I stopped wondering whether I was imagining any of this. The wedding photographer found me standing alone near the terrace doors just after the cake-cutting ceremony. Outside, soft snow drifted across the Boston skyline, while black cars lined the hotel entrance below like polished shadows beneath the city lights. Inside the ballroom, guests laughed over espresso and tiny slices of 12-layer wedding cake covered in gold sugar flowers. I had paid $8,000 for that cake alone because Sabrina insisted the bakery was famous on social media. "Mrs. Harper?" a quiet voice asked beside me. I turned to see a man around my age holding a camera against his chest. His silver hair curled slightly around his ears, and reading glasses rested low on his nose. He looked uncomfortable in the careful way decent people look when they are forced to witness something ugly. "I am sorry to bother you," he said softly. "My name is Leonard. I handled the engagement photos last spring." I smiled politely. Of course, the pictures were beautiful. His expression tightened instead of relaxing. "That is actually why I wanted to speak with you." Something in his tone made me still completely. Around us, the ballroom glowed warm and golden while a jazz trio began playing near the dance floor. Sabrina spun gracefully through clusters of guests accepting compliments while Patricia directed waiters as though she owned the hotel itself. Everything looked elegant from far away. Leonard lowered his voice carefully. "Your granddaughter instructed my team not to include you in most of the formal wedding photos tonight." I stared at him for several seconds without speaking. I do not think the sentence shocked me as much as the gentleness in his voice did. It sounded like an apology someone had been carrying around for hours. "I see," I answered quietly. He looked genuinely distressed now. "I argued against it," he admitted. "I told them it would look strange later. Family photographs matter." My throat tightened unexpectedly. Family photographs matter. Walter used to say the same thing every Christmas while arranging everyone carefully beside the fireplace at the lake house. He believed photographs were proof that love had existed somewhere once. Leonard hesitated before continuing. "There is more," he said. "During the reception introductions, Patricia specifically requested that if possible, we avoid close shots of you seated alone." He glanced down briefly. "She said it would hurt the aesthetic." The aesthetic. I almost laughed again at how wealthy people transformed cruelty into tasteful vocabulary. Not rejection. Aesthetic. Not exclusion. Presentation. I folded my hands calmly in front of me because suddenly they felt unsteady. Across the ballroom, Sabrina threw her head back laughing while Daniel stood beside her looking increasingly distant from the celebration surrounding him. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked finally. Leonard looked toward the dance floor before answering. "Because 20 years ago, my own sons cut me out of a family photograph after my divorce. They said it would make things less awkward for their mother." His voice remained steady, but I heard the fracture underneath it anyway. I spent years pretending it did not hurt. Neither of us spoke for a moment. The music floated softly through the ballroom while guests clinked champagne glasses beneath crystal chandeliers. Then Leonard reached carefully into the leather camera bag resting at his side and removed a single printed photograph. "I was not supposed to take this one," he admitted quietly. He handed it to me gently. It showed me standing near the ballroom entrance earlier that evening beneath the gold wedding lights. Alone, calm, dignified. My navy dress shimmered softly beneath the chandeliers while people blurred around me in motion. Somehow Leonard had captured exactly how the night felt, like the world was moving around me while I slowly disappeared inside it. "It is the only honest photograph I took all night," he said. I stared down at the picture while something cold and clear settled quietly inside me. Not sadness anymore. Not confusion. Understanding. Then, from across the ballroom, I heard Patricia's voice drift sharply through the music. "Once the trust transfers after the honeymoon," she said with a laugh, "that old house finally becomes useful." I do not remember crossing the ballroom after hearing Patricia's voice. One moment I was standing beside the terrace doors holding Leonard's photograph in trembling fingers, and the next I found myself near the back corridor beside the coat check station where the music sounded distant and muffled through velvet walls. The hotel hallway smelled faintly of coffee and polished wood. Somewhere nearby, dishes clattered softly from the catering kitchen while guests continued celebrating only a few yards away, completely unaware that an entire family was quietly collapsing beneath all the gold and candlelight. "Evelyn." I turned at the sound of my name and saw Martin Hale approaching slowly down the hallway. He looked older than the last time I had seen him after Walter's funeral 3 years earlier. His silver suit hung neatly across narrow shoulders, and his leather briefcase rested beneath one arm exactly the way it always had during decades of handling Walter's legal affairs. Martin had been more than our attorney. He had been Walter's closest friend since law school in New Haven almost 50 years ago. "I wondered how long it would take before I found you standing alone somewhere tonight," he said gently. I smiled faintly. Apparently not very long. His expression darkened slightly as his eyes moved toward the name tag pinned to my dress. He read it carefully without speaking. Then he let out a slow breath through his nose. "Walter feared something like this," he said quietly. The words settled over me with strange calmness instead of surprise. I leaned lightly against the hallway wall while guests laughed faintly in the distance beyond the ballroom doors. "How much did he know?" I asked. Martin adjusted his glasses carefully before answering. "Not specifics. But during the last year of his life, he became increasingly concerned about Patricia's influence over Sabrina." He paused briefly, and about the way financial discussions always seemed to appear whenever family affection disappeared. That sounded exactly like Walter. He never accused people directly. He simply observed them until the truth exhausted itself. Martin rested the briefcase carefully on a nearby console table. About 8 months before he passed away, Walter amended the Harper family trust. I stared at him quietly while something cold moved slowly through my chest. "Amended it how?" Martin hesitated only a second. "He included what is legally called a dignity clause." I blinked once. "A what?" "A protection provision," Martin explained softly. "Any beneficiary found publicly humiliating, exploiting, or intentionally isolating you for financial advantage would immediately forfeit their inheritance rights under the trust." For a moment, the hallway became completely silent except for the distant hum of music leaking beneath ballroom doors. I thought about the seating arrangement, the slideshow, the speeches, the missing photographs, the name tag. Piece by piece, the evening rearranged itself into something undeniable. Martin studied my face carefully. "Walter loved you very much, Evelyn. He worried that after he was gone, people might begin treating you differently once they saw you as the remaining gatekeeper to the estate." I looked down at Leonard's photograph still resting in my hand. The lonely woman beneath the chandeliers no longer looked confused. She looked warned. "Does Sabrina know about this clause?" I asked. Martin shook his head slowly. "No, neither Patricia nor Sabrina were informed directly." "Then why tell me tonight?" His voice softened. "Because the trust officially transfers majority control after the honeymoon. Once that happens, your leverage becomes far more complicated legally." I closed my eyes briefly. Somewhere inside the ballroom, applause erupted loudly for another toast. Celebration layered over greed so perfectly that most people would never know the difference. Martin lowered his voice even further. "Evelyn, if what has happened tonight qualifies as intentional humiliation, and frankly I believe it does, the trust can be frozen immediately pending review." I opened my eyes slowly and looked toward the ballroom entrance where warm golden lights spilled into the hallway like a beautiful lie. Then I thought about Sabrina's laughter, Patricia's comments, the years of careful erasure disguised as elegance. No, I said calmly. Martin frowned slightly. No. I slipped Leonard's photograph carefully into my evening purse before answering. Not yet. I walked back into the ballroom beside Martin as though nothing had changed, although by then everything had. The music sounded brighter somehow, sharper around the edges, like laughter drifting through cracked glass. Guests crowded the dance floor beneath enormous crystal chandeliers, while waiters refreshed champagne towers near the bar. From a distance, the wedding still looked flawless. Elegant women in satin gowns smiled beside men discussing investment portfolios and vacation homes in Martha's Vineyard. The band shifted into an upbeat jazz standard while photographers continued capturing carefully curated happiness from every angle. But now I could see the machinery underneath it all. Every smile had a calculation behind it. Every compliment carried expectation. Martin leaned slightly toward me before returning. To the reception area. Call me when you are ready, he said quietly. I nodded once. I will. Then I watched him disappear into the crowd while I remained standing near the edge of the ballroom, holding myself straighter than I had all evening. Across the room, Sabrina noticed me returning and smiled brightly before whispering something into Patricia's ear. Patricia glanced toward me briefly with visible relief, as though she had worried I might leave before the final performance concluded. They still believed I was confused, emotional, fragile. That was the advantage of growing older. People often mistake quietness for weakness because they no longer bother looking carefully. Grandma. Sabrina approached carrying a fresh champagne flute in one hand. Her wedding ring glittered beneath the lights every time she moved. There you are. We were wondering where you disappeared to. I accepted the champagne politely. I needed some air. Well, do not vanish completely tonight, she laughed lightly. People already think you are mysterious. Mysterious. Another elegant word people use when they do not want to admit they ignored someone for years. Daniel joined us moments later, loosening his tie slightly while glancing between Sabrina and me with visible tension. Everything okay? He asked carefully. Of course, Sabrina answered before I could speak. Grandma is just overwhelmed by all the excitement. She said it with affectionate amusement, like someone explaining away an elderly relative's confusion at a family gathering. I looked directly at her for the first time all evening. Actually, I said softly, I think I am seeing things more clearly than I have in years. Something flickered across Sabrina's face for less than a second. Uncertainty. Then the smile returned immediately. That is wonderful, she replied smoothly. Nearby, the master of ceremonies tapped the microphone announcing the final speeches before dancing officially began. Guests returned eagerly to their tables while waiters dimmed the lights another level until the ballroom glowed amber beneath candlelight. Sabrina squeezed Daniel's hand and moved toward the stage area with practiced elegance, while Patricia followed close behind like a campaign manager preparing for a victory speech. I returned quietly to table 14. This time I noticed things I had missed earlier. Guests who barely acknowledged me before now looked away too quickly when our eyes met. A bridesmaid whispered something while glancing toward my name tag, and immediately covered her mouth to hide a smile. One of Patricia's friends stared openly at my isolated table before muttering, Well, every family has complications. Complications. Such delicate language for cruelty. Sabrina stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause. The ballroom screens behind her displayed another slideshow of engagement photos, while soft piano music drifted through hidden speakers. Tonight has been absolutely magical, she began emotionally. And honestly, none of this would have happened without the incredible people who supported us. Her eyes swept gracefully across the ballroom while guests smiled up at her admiringly. My mother especially has sacrificed so much to give me this perfect day. Patricia pressed manicured fingers beneath her eyes as though overwhelmed with emotion. Applause erupted immediately. I sat perfectly still. Then Sabrina laughed lightly into the microphone. And of course, we are also happy Grandma Evelyn could make a rare appearance tonight. The ballroom responded with scattered polite laughter. Daniel's expression tightened instantly beside her. Patricia smiled into her champagne glass. Around me, several guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But Sabrina kept speaking casually, unaware that every word now carried a price attached to it. The laughter faded faster than Sabrina expected. It happened gradually at first, like a room losing oxygen one breath at a time. A few guests exchanged uncomfortable glances after her comment about my rare appearance. Daniel shifted beside her beneath the stage lights, while Patricia avoided looking in my direction completely. Sabrina, however, continued smiling into the microphone with the polished confidence of someone who had spent her entire life believing charm could smooth over cruelty. But seriously, she continued brightly, families are complicated, and tonight is really about celebrating new beginnings. More scattered applause followed, thinner this time. I sat quietly at table 14 with my hands folded beside an untouched champagne glass, while Leonard's photograph rested safely inside my purse like silent evidence of everything this evening had become. Then, before the master of ceremonies could retake the microphone, another voice spoke calmly from the back of the ballroom. Actually, Martin Hale said evenly, there is a legal matter that should be clarified before the evening continues. The room turned almost instantly. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the band fell silent near the dance floor. Martin walked forward slowly through the center aisle holding his leather briefcase beneath one arm, while confusion spread visibly across Patricia's face. Sabrina blinked several times beneath the stage lights before forcing another laugh. Martin, she said carefully, this is probably not the best time. On the contrary, Martin replied calmly. Timing is extremely important in trust law. The ballroom became so quiet I could hear silverware lightly touching china somewhere near the back tables. Martin stepped onto the stage beside Sabrina and removed several documents from his briefcase with the calm precision of a man who had delivered uncomfortable truths for most of his professional life. My name is Martin Hale, he announced clearly. I served as legal counsel for Walter Harper for more than 40 years. Several older guests immediately recognized the name. I saw expressions change around the room as curiosity replaced celebration. Patricia's posture stiffened visibly. Martin adjusted his glasses and continued. Prior to his passing, Walter Harper amended the Harper Family Trust to include a dignity protection clause concerning his wife, Evelyn Harper. Sabrina's smile disappeared completely now. Martin, Patricia interrupted sharply. This is wildly inappropriate. He did not even glance toward her. The clause states that any beneficiary found publicly humiliating, intentionally isolating, or exploiting Mrs. Harper for financial gain immediately forfeits inheritance privileges pending legal review. A ripple moved through the ballroom like cold wind passing across water. Guests looked toward me then, really looked at me for the first time all evening. Martin lifted one of the documents slightly. Based on extensive documented behavior observed tonight, including public ridicule, deliberate exclusion from family representation, and multiple witness testimonies, the Harper Family Trust is now officially frozen effective immediately. Patricia's champagne glass nearly slipped from her hand. You cannot be serious, she whispered. Sabrina stared at Martin as though she no longer understood the language he was speaking. Frozen? She repeated weakly. Martin nodded once. Additionally, all pending property transfers associated with the Cape Cod estate and related investment holdings are suspended pending formal review by the trustees. Daniel stepped backward slightly beside Sabrina, his face pale beneath the ballroom lights. Sabrina, he said quietly, what is he talking about? She looked toward her mother instantly, panic flashing openly across her expression for the first time all night. Patricia recovered quickly enough to force anger into her voice. This is manipulation, she snapped loudly. Evelyn, tell him to stop embarrassing this family. I looked at her calmly across the silent ballroom. Embarrassing this family. The irony almost made me smile. No, I said softly. I think the family handled that part without my help. Somewhere near the back tables, a guest quietly set down a champagne glass. Another lowered her eyes toward the floor. The chandeliers still glowed gold overhead. The flowers still smelled sweet. The wedding still looked beautiful. But now everyone inside that ballroom could finally see what had been hiding underneath it. Nobody stopped me when I stood up from table 14. That was the strange thing about truth once it finally enters a room. It silences people who previously had far too much to say. Around the ballroom, guests avoided eye contact while Patricia whispered furiously to Martin near the stage. Sabrina remained frozen beneath the chandelier lights, her perfect bridal posture collapsing inch by inch beneath the weight of public embarrassment she had never imagined turning back toward her. Daniel stood several feet away from her now, one hand pressed against his mouth while confusion and disappointment battled visibly across his face. The band members quietly packed away sheet music near the dance floor, uncertain whether the reception was still continuing or not. I picked up my evening purse slowly and slipped Leonard's photograph carefully inside beside my gloves. Then I walked toward the ballroom exit at the same calm pace I had entered hours earlier. No dramatic speech. No shouting. At my age, I had learned that silence often leaves deeper echoes than anger ever could. "Grandma, wait." Sabrina's voice cracked behind me before I reached the doors. I turned slowly. For the first time all evening, she no longer looked polished. Her mascara had begun smudging slightly beneath her eyes, and panic had erased the confident sparkle from her expression. She looked young suddenly. Frightened. "You cannot do this tonight," she whispered while several nearby guests pretended not to listen. "People are staring." I almost smiled at that. Not because it was funny, but because after everything she had done, that was still the part she feared most. Not losing me. Not hurting me. Being seen. "Sabrina," I said quietly. "People started staring the moment you decided humiliation was acceptable entertainment." Tears filled her eyes instantly. Real tears this time. "I was joking," she insisted weakly. "Everybody jokes around at weddings." I studied her face carefully beneath the ballroom lights. Somewhere beneath the greed and performance, I could still faintly recognize the little girl who once hid beside me during thunderstorms. But love cannot survive forever inside a place where respect has already died. "No," I answered gently. "People who love you protect your dignity when you are not in the room." Her face crumpled slightly then. Behind her, Patricia approached quickly in sharp heels, her expression hard with controlled fury. "Evelyn, enough," she snapped under her breath. "You have made your point." I looked at her calmly. "Actually, Patricia, all I did tonight was sit quietly in the seat your family chose for me." For once, she had no response. The ballroom doors opened as a hotel attendant stepped aside politely, and cold winter air drifted softly into the lobby beyond. Snow continued falling outside across the streets of Boston, coating black town cars and glowing sidewalks in soft white silence. Leonard appeared near the entrance holding his camera bag against his shoulder. "Mrs. Harper," he called gently before I stepped outside. He walked toward me and handed over a small cream-colored envelope. "I printed another copy for you." Inside was the photograph he had taken earlier beneath the chandeliers. The honest one. I stared at it quietly for a long moment. Alone at the edge of the ballroom. Calm while disappearing. Then I looked back through the open doors one final time. Guests still stood frozen around white roses and gold candlelight, while Sabrina remained beneath the stage lights looking smaller than she had hours earlier. The wedding looked exactly the same as before. Beautiful from a distance. Broken up close. Leonard glanced toward the ballroom and sighed softly. "They spent the whole evening trying to erase you from the story," he said. I slipped the photograph carefully back into the envelope and smiled faintly for the first time that night. "That is the funny thing about photographs," I replied. "Eventually, people always notice who is missing." Then I stepped out into the falling snow and walked toward the waiting car, while warm ballroom lights faded quietly behind me like a chapter finally closing.